Let me tell you about a very interesting and back then pretty controversial scientific movement that shaped biology and chemistry and even had a great influence on medicine between the 17th and the 19th century in Europe. I'm talking about the infamous philosophy of vitalism. Vitalism was not just some French pseudoscience. It was a serious scientific philosophy entertained by many respected scientific figures and thinkers of the time. For example, the German chemist and physician Georg Ernst Stahl believed that there is some living force, or anima, that imbued animate matter and differentiated it from inanimate matter. And he also believed that disease was caused by a disturbance in this living force, and that this living force served to regulate bodily functions that made living matter alive. The Swedish botanist Carl Linnaeus was also influenced by vitalist ideas and used them to classify living beings. The French physician Xavier Bichat, I hope I pronounced the name right, described life as the ensemble functions that resisted death, which is a pretty good definition from my perspective. Furthermore, in the early 20th century, the French philosopher Henri Bergson coined the term élan vital, which means the vital impulse, to describe this life energy that imbued living beings. Even philosophers of physics like Émilie du Châtelet played a pretty important role in the development of vitalism. In the 18th century, she defended the Leibniz view of vis viva, or living force, against the Newtonian view of living beings as inert matter. Du Châtelet herself was not a vitalist, but her philosophical work helped shape the environment in which vitalism flourished afterwards. So what exactly is vitalism? Vitalism is the view that living matter was inherently different from non-living matter, and even sacred in some sense. Biological processes like healing, reproduction, growth required a special kind of explanation, and they were not confined to the laws of chemistry and physics alone. They required some form of life force to regulate them. This was called the vis vitalis in Latin. In vitalism, there is a strict distinction between organic matter and inorganic matter. One cannot synthesize organic substances from inorganic ones. Vitalism didn't begin exactly in the 17th century. Its roots go much deeper. Beginning with our very good friend Aristotle. He distinguished between living matter and non-living matter. Living matter had something he called the psyche, or the soul. There were three kinds of souls. The vegetative soul, which plants had, responsible for reproduction and growth. There was the sensitive soul, animals had it, responsible for movement and sensation. And there was the rational soul, which we had, responsible for our reasoning and intellect. And these ancient ideas, which were kind of similar to vitalism, were also existent cross-culturally, like in China, in the Chinese qi, for example, or the Indian concept of prana. Enter Renaissance animism. In the Renaissance era, animism is the view that everything is alive. Figures like Giordano Bruno argued that the cosmos was imbued by a living spirit. Paracelsus, who was a physician alchemist, believed that the human body has something he called the archeus, the living spirit. The difference between animism and vitalism is that animism saw vitality everywhere. In animism, stones, stars, humans, animals, plants, everything was alive. What makes the philosophy of vitalism very interesting in my perspective is the debate that took place between vitalists on the one hand and more mechanistic philosophers on the other hand, influenced by Descartes and Newton. These philosophers viewed the body as a machine, using even terms like pulleys, levers, pumps, to describe the bodily functions. This debate carried on even to medicine, with the more vitalist physicians relying on the bodily ability to heal itself by itself and encouraging more dietary and environmental changes to help the patients heal. Whereas the non-vitalist physicians would rely more on physical intervention like surgery or drugs. But in the 19th century, a scientific discovery shook the foundation of vitalism. When Friedrich Wöhler, a German chemist, synthesized urea, a compound found in urine, from inorganic starting materials. Organic compounds are not as special anymore. But it wasn't that the philosophy of vitalism completely disappeared after this scientific discovery. It's always the case that in scientific disputes, the supporters of some scientific view or some theory, some philosophy, keep on holding their view despite scientific evidence for some period of time. But with the development of biochemistry, molecular biology, and anatomy, physiology, it became clear that the philosophy of vitalism was just not scientific. Among living scientists, there is some consensus that living beings are sufficiently complex that they require some special kind of explanation. Terms like emergence and self-organization come into the story. So in the end, vitalism didn't survive as a scientific doctrine. But I find this debate between the vitalist scientists on the one hand and the more mechanistic, deterministic, materialistic scientists on the other hand very interesting. And even until today, there's a lot of mysteries around life and living beings. And I'm excited to share more about the stuff I'm learning with you.